Assalamu alaikum, good evening, and welcome to tonight's episode of Talking Points. I'm your host, Syed Neaz Ahmad. As usual, we have a distinguished guest in our studio, Mr. Syed Badrul Ahsan, editor in charge of Daily Asian Age. He's a seasoned journalist, a writer of many books on Bangladesh and Southeast Asia. Recently, he was in Hull to attend a conference, and I'm going to ask him about that conference that relates to China and its activities in Southeast Asia. Welcome to the show, sir.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. I understand, from little birds that told me that you were in Hull and to attend a conference on China's
Belt and Road
and the
Initiative.
road that's being built around so many countries for better communication to the warm sea. What did you discuss and what was it about, and who had organized it?
Well, it was organized by the Department of Law and Politics at the University of Hull, and they had participants coming from China, from the US, from Pakistan, and from India. And of course, since I was here and they got to know about my presence in the UK,
Right.
they invited me over also. The subject was China's Belt and Road Initiative in relation to its ramifications for the rest of South Asia. So the discussions were actually were focused on what China has been doing lately in terms of this Belt and Road Initiative, and a good number of points came up for discussion whether China's perspectives on the rest of the world was basically the economic development of the underdeveloped regions of the globe, and at the same time whether this process could be described as colonialism in a new context, neo-colonization, as some people call it. Of course, a good number of papers were presented at the conference, and they all dealt with this subject. And of course, each participant had his own particular point of view. The Chinese had theirs, Pakistanis had theirs, Indians had theirs. So that way,
What was the meeting point?
Well, the meeting point was that it is a good initiative. I mean, when countries like China and India, of course, when they come together, it all redounds to the benefit of other nations in the area. But that was one point these participants agreed on. But at the same time, they also took care to mention the fact that nothing should be done in a way that could exacerbate tensions in South Asia, because this Chinese this Belt and Road policy, it actually stretches from Pakistan and goes all the way to Southeast Asia, and the intention is again to go all the way to Central Asia. And lately, a couple of weeks ago, the Chinese government arranged a summit meeting of African heads of government. A whole lot of them were there, and the Chinese government has been doling out money. And this thing was discussed. At the same time, the question of China's aid to these different countries,
Right.
say the extent of aid it is giving, and whether the countries which are recipients of such aid are able to give back that repay that aid, that also came up. So I mean, this was a good academic discussion, but it also raised some. Well, it was a combination of optimism, and at the same time some kind of apprehension about the future. That was what was discussed.
What was the reaction of the Chinese participants?
Well, the Chinese participants, they repeatedly pointed out the fact that it was China's policy, unconditional policy of helping these other nations in Asia and Africa, basically, and perhaps at a later stage in Latin America, to develop their economies. That was the Chinese position.
Right.
And I could see that when these discussions were going on, when some participants from India and from the United States, they presented the other side of the argument.
Right.
The Chinese were very defensive about it, and they took pains to point out the fact that there were no strings attached,
Right.
and the Chinese were doing it in a spirit of brotherly relations, fraternal relations, we might put it.
Yeah.
So that was. But I could sense those who participated from China, and naturally, China being China,
Yeah.
the political system being what it is, they were not willing to articulate opinions which could militate against the official
Right.
Chinese position.
Right, right.
So that was my feeling.
So, but don't you think that it is a kind of economic muscle flexing of one giant power in Southeast Asia?
It is because I can tell you something. When I went to Pakistan last year, I was invited by the Pakistan government, and I went there. And at one point, there was a think tank, and this very young lady who runs it, and who is said to be in very close links with the Pakistani establishment, including the Pakistan Army, of course. And she was explaining this question of CPEC, see, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor.
Yeah.
And she was explaining to us, there were some others with me, the fact that this CPEC, this initiative by the Chinese, would extend all the way to Bangladesh, to Thailand, to other places, to Myanmar, and
To Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. But she did not mention India. So when I asked her, I said, why don't you mention India? Because India, if you go to Bangladesh from Pakistan, and then you go to Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, Thailand, Myanmar, there is India in between. So what do you do about that? And she had a very blunt expression that India is welcome to join BRI, this Belt and Road Initiative, or CPEC. CPEC, of course, is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And under this program, they were developing Gwadar port. Now, Gwadar used to be a very small village on the Makran coast of Pakistan's most poorest province, Balochistan. Now they've developed it into a very modern port. Now, the discussions that took place at the University of Hull, they centered on the fact that the Chinese have recently made inroads into these countries in such a way that these countries, some of these countries, are not being able to pay back their loans. For example, the Maldives.
Yeah.
Maldives has been taking a lot of loans, but then the feeling is it can never repay the Chinese. So in return, it has to give the Chinese something which the Chinese can control. The example was, in recent years, the Chinese helped the Sri Lankan government build a port called Hambantota, Hambantota in Sri Lanka. And the Sri Lankan government very happily in the beginning obtained or received a huge amount of loans from the Chinese. Now they find that they cannot pay back the Chinese. So what they have done is hand over Hambantota port to the Chinese, and on a 99-year lease.
Yeah.
So effectively, it has become a Chinese port.
It's like Hong Kong.
Hong Kong. And the fear is much the same thing will happen to Gwadar in Pakistan. It's the presence of Chinese engineers, Chinese personnel, Chinese technicians. It all makes it seem that it is a Chinese port. So that element came up. So in light of what has been happening in Hambantota and Gwadar, discussions also came around to the idea of Shonadia in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Now, the Bangladesh government had previously agreed to accept Chinese loans to develop Shonadia, which is a rural backwater in Bangladesh, facing the Bay of Bengal. But then, at some point, the Bangladesh government decided that it was not wise. Of course, there were also other factors. The Indians were not very friendly toward the idea. Neither were the Russians and the Americans. And the Bangladesh government, for its part, it has second thoughts. It cancelled that deal. So, and one important reason why Bangladesh had to go back on the deal was the experience it was seeing happening in Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So that discussion also came up for the question of how Bangladesh has been able to stave off this Chinese offer of help. Of course, Bangladesh has been receiving assistance in other areas, for example, defense and economic assistance in other areas. Yes. But in an area like Shonadia, because Bangladesh knows that Gwadar is gone,
yeah,
to all intents and purposes, Hambantota in Sri Lanka is gone. So Bangladesh is very careful not to give away part of his territory, which could in future be utilized as a military base, because the Chinese are spreading all over the area. Yeah. Because they now have previously they did not have any navy, I mean, in Chinese history. Yeah. In modern times, especially under President Xi Jinping, they have been developing their navy, and the navy has made inroads into the Indian Ocean, which is of course a matter of great concern to the Indian government. Naturally, and the Americans also. So after what is happening in the South China Sea, the Chinese are claiming the South China Sea for themselves. So naturally, these countries are concerned. India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Pakistan too is concerned, but then Pakistan is too tied to Chinese policy to play an effective role.
They have been tied to Chinese policy for a very, very long time, isn't it?
Right from the 1960s,
yes.
when Pakistan had a turnaround in foreign policy. Not turnaround, we said spread out during the time when Ayub Khan was there and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was foreign minister, if you remember 1960s.
Yes, but Bangladesh is also greatly indebted to China because as you mentioned that the arms, Bangladesh is probably the second largest buyer of arms, Chinese arms in the world.
Yes. So,
and can Bangladesh resist the temptation or say influence of China, despite the getting a nod from Delhi or not? See, can they really resist? Because this is huge influence of China. Now China is also aligning with Russia, see. So it's no more a unipolar world now, see. And Southeast Asia suddenly has become a very important region in the world because of Chinese activities around the Indian subcontinent and other regions.
The way I see it, Bangladesh has been, in terms of diplomacy, it has been playing a very smart kind of diplomacy, in the sense that it has...
At least on that front.
On that front, because we have... India, of course, is our neighbor on 3 sides of our territory. And of course, we, as they say, one can't choose one's neighbors.
True.
So, and lately, of course, in recent years, we've also developed very close ties, defense cooperation, especially with the Chinese. So what Bangladesh is doing, as far as I can say, as far as I can see it, is that Bangladesh has tried to maintain an equidistance or a balance in its foreign policy. So it all goes back to what the foreign policy that Bangabandhu articulated way back in the 1970s, early 70s, was friendship for all and malice toward none. But then he also...
Right, sir. We need to take a break.
Yes,
and
sure.
When we come back, we'll pick up the thread. Thank you for being with us, and we'll be back soon after this short break. Don't go away.